Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I am sitting across the monitor from an old new friend, S.P. O'Mahony from Cluj, Romania. But the moment he opens his mouth, you realize he wasn't born there. S.P. is an Irishman who has worked all over the world, and God's got an amazing call on his life and the world of business, but also on his family's life in the world of encouragement. So, first of all, S.P., welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mike.
S.P. and I, we met in, February of last year.
That's right.
There was a conference in Bucharest that was called BAM Connect. There's a local BAM group there led by some dear brothers, and they put it on, and SP was one of the, group leaders, breakout leaders, and they're just, I have to say, not to blow sunshine on you, but there's something about you. The moment I met you, I knew we were going to be friends. And even though we haven't spent a lot of time together, I think I was right.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
So SP has got, let me give you a little background. I'm going to let him fill in the blank. He's from Ireland. He's from the UK. He works, among other things, with a company called ATG, which is worth checking out. It is a profoundly overt, in a wonderful way, kingdom company based out of the UK and having influence around the world. He's also not just a business guy, but he's also a politician. Not in the sense that you might think of it, but this past year, I think you were awarded the Honorary Irish Consul to Transylvania. Did I get that right?
Pretty much, yes. But we can't really say Transylvania because Transylvania is just a notion. It's not a place. So technically, it's in Cluj for the 12 counties that happen to be Transylvania. Yeah. But yes, I am the Irish Honorary Consul in this part of Romania.
He's also involved with some NGO work. And he threw a word at me the other day that we're going to get into, if I get this right, Relationology.
Mm-hmm.
And so, SP, I'll let you tell the story, but the two things I took away from our conversation last week was that your role as a connector and your role as an encourager. I say role, they're really a calling for you that you stepped into. But so go back in time. We'll get to all of that. But give us a little bit of your story and how you got from Ireland to ATG to Hungary and Romania. A little bit of the journey there.
When I was a student, I joined one of the churches of the 5 house church movements in the UK called Pioneer. And my hometown in the UK is where the mother church for that network was. And I became very involved with the church. And after university, I moved back to the same place and joined that church. Very dynamic, 600, 700 people, and lots of investment in training and development, and so on. So I did various different things. And I think at that time, it was around 1990, and things were changing in Eastern Europe. And the church started to consider how to work in Romania. One of the leaders of the church had a calling to go and bring teams or take teams to Romania. So that's how it all started for me back in the early 90s. I went in 1992 with the church to a town with the biggest orphanage in the country, with 650 kids who were Hungarian or Roma. And that's, I guess, where things really started to happen in terms of my call. And I have a sense then that's when it started that I was called to the Hungarian and Romanian people, both of them. And they're the most significant in my life. I also have some interesting connections in Africa, which are some other countries there. But the first two are Hungary and Romania, which is where I've been living for the last 20-something years.
It's so different. I mean, Hungary and Romania are very different countries. But one of the things about that part of the world is their Christian heritage is very old and very strong. Not that everybody there is a believer, but certainly, you look at Hungary and places like that, you look at Romania, and that one time statistically they were the most Christian, and that's not necessarily born again, but the most Christian nation, I think, on the planet. What is it that you saw when you got there, SP, that most helped you understand the environment you'd be working in?
I'm a very intuitive person, which often comes with being Irish or Celtic. We have a tendency to be very, actually, proportionally more intuitive, more prophetic, I guess, than the most. And I just sensed a real feeling of God's heart for the people of Central and Eastern Europe. All states, nations in the world have been through some tough times, particularly the Irish. So we probably have a kind of a sensitivity to this as well. But Eastern Europe has been a very tough place in the last 100 years. And I think I really got the father heart of God in how he really cares and wanted to see change sweeping across Central and Eastern Europe. And I think there's a great song by the Scorpions called Winds of Change. And I guess that was an anthem for many of us as we started to explore what was behind, when we were kids, the Iron Curtain and the things that had been experienced. I also observed that even today, I can't go anywhere without having a sense and something I can see from the past that signifies communism and the Second World War. It's there's some places which are modernized and beautiful offices or shopping malls or parks, but there's always some corner which is, this is a legacy of communism, a legacy of what happened in the Second World War and the First World War, which is actually what led to the Second World War.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about it. I know my first trip to Romania was 5 years ago now, just before the pandemic. And we stayed in a hotel that was a block away from what they call the Parliamentary Palace, which was Ceausescu's monument to his own glory in the dark days. And so you've certainly seen more than I have, but I've felt the same shadow of totalitarianism. It's not gone yet. It's still there. God is doing amazing things. I remember we had one of the members of Parliament came and spoke to our BAM conference that year, and very powerful to hear her speak about, what God had called her to in her leadership role. But still, it is there. So, and I appreciate your sensitivity to that, the love that you have for the people. And I owe you a visit to Cluj, by the way. I've been told on all of my trips to Romania since 2019 that I'm missing it, but I'm going to Cluj. So my next trip over, God willing, I'm coming to Cluj. So just tell the brothers and sisters there to be ready. When you went over, was it originally kind of in a missionary capacity, church planter, or were you already operating in business and government? Because you're really a mix of all these things. You do so much.
I think back then, I was very much a business guy. I'd been working 11 years in British Airways, and I think I received various prophecies through the Pioneer Network, and it was always about a calling to business. And if I was going to go to a new country, it would be clearly in the context of doing something in a business, in the business sphere. And so effectively, I was sent by the church to Hungary initially, to Budapest, and I started a small marketing agency in working with CSR, which was in its early stages. It was difficult to make it work, but in the meantime, I recognized my Irishness, because when you're a foreigner living in the land, your name, you have your name, and you've got a suffix, which is where do you come from. So I was SP, the English guy, which didn't feel too good. So my father said, of course you don't feel too good because you're actually Irish. Let's get you your Irish passport. So I got my Irish passport. I translated my family name back to O'Mahony, which is what it is now. It was Mahoney when I was born, because my father needed to have it translated in the UK because it was too Irish for the role jobs that he had. So a lot of that happened with the Irish. A lot of it happened in Central and Eastern Europe too, where names were Romanized or modularized, Hungarian made. So it's another way of connecting with the people. I translated my name back to what it originally was. And that's when I had the opportunity. I met the Irish community, met the Irish ambassador, and effectively for 4 years, I was the Irish diplomat for commercial affairs for Hungary and Romania. And the only other country in the world at the time which put the two countries together, because they're quite sensitive between the relations between the two, was South Africa. So Ireland and South Africa, we had Hungary and Romania together before we had our own embassy in Bucharest, which was from 2005. So I had best of both worlds. I was actually an Irish diplomat helping business people in Hungary and Romania, or Hungarian and Romanian business people in Ireland, to develop connections, both the countries I love and of course, Ireland, which I'm very much attached to.
It's interesting. We talked the other day, but one of the things I suspect is that being Irish, you probably have a warmer welcome in many parts of the world than, say, me as an American. I've noticed that the Canadians are the same way. Canadians have a warmer welcome. The Brits, not so much, but better. But Ireland, you guys just seem to be, just welcomed and embraced everywhere. Part of it's because of who you are, brother, but part of it is just you don't mess with people. You got a wonderful history of blessing and serving other people.
And I think we never had the opportunity to colonize anywhere, so to speak. I don't know though, given how many Irish Americans there are, how that actually plays out. But we really did colonize, but in principle, as a state, we never actually had the opportunity to colonize anywhere. And I think that really helps.
You have to pick Boston out of that, though. Boston is an Irish colony. Always has, always will be. So, SB, tell us a little bit about what you see in the people of that part of the world, the Hungarians, the Romanians. I've not been to Hungary yet. I take that back. I mean, I've connected in Budapest, but I've never been there. What do you see about the people there? What is it that most encourages you and intrigues you and also moves you to serve?
I think it's really important that one of the things that I've learned over the years, and particularly passionate about in the context of relationology, is we all grow up with worldviews based on our parents, the culture in which we live, the part of a country in which we live. We all have very fixed worldviews. And I think for me, that's one of the most fascinating and challenging parts of operating in this part of the world. And I guess I would say it's a passion. I really would like to help anyone who's interested in listening to not be limited by their own worldviews. I would like them to know it's a worldview and it comes from their childhood and their upbringing. And if they want to be living within that, that's great. But if they realize it's a worldview and they don't have to be like that, my encouragement is to step out and step beyond that. And for example, one of them is in the area of education. So in education, it's all about one of the very few legacies of communism was universal education in this part of Europe. So there is universal education and it's relatively good, but it's all about knowledge. Whereas the world in the more developed world or the Western world, whichever world we want to describe, it's all about applied knowledge. It's not about knowledge. And those who are brought up in the knowledge education system believe that's the best way. So when they're confronted by an international school that applies perhaps the British model, which is applied knowledge, they really struggle. And that's one example. Whereas applied knowledge is actually in the 21st century, in the world in which we live today, is much more powerful as an approach because it's easy to get the knowledge. You just go and push a button and you've got it. How do you apply the knowledge is a completely different way of thinking. Yeah. So filling the young people's heads of Eastern Europe with knowledge and more knowledge just puts them under massive pressure, makes it very hard for them to do their thing and to find out their lives. So it's an example of worldview. And to answer the question directly, that's, I guess, the thing that intrigues me the most is how to be kind when it comes to worldview. So when I started in Hungary, for example, I joined a church, which was very dynamic and it was great, very dear people. But tithing, paying taxes was not something which would be normal, even in a Christian community in the early 2000s in Eastern Europe. The reason being that for the last 50 years, the government was not considered to be legitimate. So why would you pay taxes to an illegitimate government? Even if after 1990, they were democratically elected people, but Christians would not be paying taxes just like everybody else. They'd be finding ways of doing business without paying taxes, avoiding and evading tax. And so that was the first one I guess I got involved with, where I kind of took the coin of Caesar that Jesus talked about paying taxes. It was my first worldview, I think, that I challenged with my Christian friends to say, it's really important to do things well, to do them as per the law. And if you don't like the law, then make sure you do something to influence the law.
There's a quote from a book that was written after the 1960 presidential election here in the U.S. And the quote is something that's always struck me about culture and worldview and life in general. Marshall McLuhan was the author. He said, I don't know who it was that discovered water, but I know it wasn't fish. And I've always thought of that as that, when I think about worldview, we are not aware of our worldview.
No,
it's just there. It's like water to us. And so, how do you challenge, respectfully, of course, but how do you, and you use the word kind, which I think is really appropriate. How do you systematically and intentionally try to challenge or address the worldview question, particularly from a kingdom perspective, right? Kingdom it's a worldview, a cosmic view, so it's what in Portuguese they call it cosmovision. And it's just this beautiful word of seeing everything through the kingdom. But how do you get from that to a worldview as deeply entrenched as that part of the world where you live?
I think it's a lot about, for me to be authentic as I observe and care and love people. And I don't want to say that flippantly, but I really do care. It's really important for me to gently find a way to challenge the worldviews, to say this is a worldview. And one of the parallels, which I think is really relevant, is I serve on the board of Migrator of Romania Foundation, which is one of the biggest foundations in the country. And the foundation has no particular perspective called intergenerationality. So everything we do is related to bringing generations together to make a better Romania. And in particular, this is so important. It's about what happens as people age in Eastern Europe. And sweeping generalization, I'm sure, but once a couple of parents have had their children, and their daughter, let's say, is safely married, and then in her own apartment, and then has their own children, mum and dad kind of go at the age of 45, 50, probably, go, we're finished now, we're okay now, we're all right. They lose all aspiration, with the greatest respect, but I know it's a generalization, but for development, growth, their own growth, and they're still young. And this is one I think which is really important. And so I've not only done it personally, but I've joined organizations that also are all about challenging worldviews, such as the Margareta Foundation. It's all about challenging this worldview about how to age actively. So the most important thing we do is that all our programs involve senior volunteers who are actually perhaps doing the after-school clubs. That would be one example. Not many organizations would do that in Eastern Europe.
I read a book recently that speaks a little bit to that, challenges a worldview about retirement, a Western view of retirement. And the book is called An Uncommon Guide to Retirement. It's a Christian guy that wrote it. And he's challenging the whole concept, the whole construct of, you work till you're 50, 60, whatever, and then you retire and, quote, enjoy life. And he's not coming across in an angry way at all. He's simply asking us to, go back to the Lord and say, and now what? Instead of, living out the so-called dream. And that's a worldview situation. As you just described, it has different implications there in Eastern Europe, but it's no less damaging. All right, so SP, tell us for a second about ATG, the company you work with, and then I want to get into specifically relationology. I want you to unpack that. And particularly, as we talked about earlier, you describe yourself as a connector and an encourager. But just quickly, what is ATG, and how has it become such an overtly kingdom company that God is using in amazing ways?
I think the important thing is that when Mark established the company about 16, 17 years ago with his wife, Jackie, he did it as a direct response to what he felt the Lord was asking them to do. So right from the beginning, Mark's vision has been, we have this company because the Lord asked me to do it. So I think that's a really good way to start, to lead a company and to hold on to that, because it influences everything. I think the other interesting thing is about something to do with control. And one of the things that I observe is that for many of us who are Christians in business, we used a lot of our intellect and our education and our experience with often not much space for the Holy Spirit to move or to work or to influence us. So I actually have a life mantra, Mike, which is I love to live with my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground. So my feet on the ground is my intellect, which is genetic, my education, my privilege of growing up in the UK and my Irish connections and so on and so on. But my head in the clouds is always looking and following my faith and being inspired by the Holy Spirit about how I live. So blending the two together. And I think that's the heart of what Mark is seeking to do with the company, and many of us who share the faith with him are operating that way. It's a question who's in control. And we want the Lord to be in control. And whatever we do, however we do it, listening to him and finding the right ways.
We'll be right back after a short break. The Business as Mission podcast is in partnership with TriVenture, the BAM Launchpad. TriVenture offers the 3 ingredients every entrepreneur needs to launch and scale a BAM business: courses, coaching, and capital. For more information, visit triventure.com.
So, SB, now I hear those words a lot, right? My business belongs to God. And
Sure.
I know with you, this is different than just the traditional bumper sticker, God is my co-pilot type of stuff. I know where your heart is. What is different with Mark, with you, the other leaders at ATG? What is different that you guys really are listening to and following the Holy Spirit as opposed to saying the words?
5 of us meet every 2 weeks to pray. And I think I'm sure many companies do that. But we talk about our families. We understand one another as friends. We talk about the company and the challenges that we have. And we pray. And Mark's very diligent at keeping a logbook of what we pray for. And he helpfully reminds us. So those of us who are praying for a particular thing, maybe I have something with one of my sons, praying a particular thing, I forget that actually God answered that. Mark doesn't, because it's in his book. We prayed for this 3 months ago, SP, and it's now happened. Isn't that amazing? So this sounds very formulaic. It's much more alive than that. And but that's, I think, one thing which is very important. I think the other thing which I find really, really interesting is there's no ego in the company. That for me is very important. So Mark is very charismatic, but he's very appropriately humble about this is not all about him. We all love having him as the CEO and the founder and so on, but he's not pushing himself. So I think he models no ego. And I think having no ego, and I've been in one other organization where ego was banned here in Romania, which was quite dramatic and very good. But ego so often gets in the way of good things happening and being able to hear from God because of the way that people operate. And with the greatest respect, I think the way men operate as opposed to women. I think women are operating in a different way. It's less of a risk for women than it is for men. But I think for men, it's quite a high risk in a business context, be Christian or not Christian, that ego can take over too often, and reliance on who we are, what we've known, what we've experienced. And I think the final part I would add is that, and kind of is a bit of a segue to relationology, one of my life hacks is I want to be a lifelong learner. I think that's what actually it means to follow Jesus, is to always be learning, to become more like him. But it means being open to always learn. And I think that's a culture which is very important, which we have in ATG, which is always learning new, always thinking there's another way, always being surprised that something might happen in a different way. So I think lifelong learning is a very important aspect to it. And very briefly, my experience of Opportunity International, where I was more than 10 years, it had ego, but some remarkable human beings for whom lifelong learning operating in their 70s and their 80s on the boards of these microfinance organizations around the world, where they're still learning at 80 and still working at 80. For me, they're the most remarkable people in the world. And I aspire to be just like that, to be in my 70s and 80s and still wanting to learn, still being able to be challenged by somebody who might be 20% of my age, somebody in their 20s challenge. Yeah. We want that. We want that challenge. We want that respectful challenge, but we want that challenge. And I think these are some of the flavors of ATG that help us to be, I guess, developing, growing, extending the company, our impact, our reach, the kingdom.
I was thinking, before we jump into Relationology, you told me on our call last week about Mark sort of hitting $10 million in revenue and saying, okay, Lord, I'm done. It's time to just flatten out, just take it easy and not quit, but just kind of, go in a holding pattern. And the Lord said, nope, I want you to be bigger, to spread the grace I've given you. And he said, yes. And I love that story. And that obviously, informs the culture that we're not done. We'll never be done, period. God says, move on further in. As C.S. Lewis said, further in, higher up. I love that. So, all right. So Relationology, you threw that word at me the other day. I had never heard of it. I don't know if that's a O'Mahonyism or if that's a real word, but talk about that and then into your personal and family application of it as connect or encourage. That's really what I want people to hear about and get to know you a little bit better.
So Relationology is actually three guys. Matt Bird is in London. Richard Beaumont is in Melbourne, Australia, and me here in Cluj. Matt is the founder of Relationology about 20 years ago. And he was a bit of a one-man show traveling the world. He also founded an organization, a Christian NGO called Neighbor, which is resourcing churches about how to be relevant in their society. And it operates in, I think, about 15 different countries. So it comes from Matt. It's Matt's idea. He liked the idea of relationships. And the easiest way to describe it to you, Mike, and to the listeners is many of us really don't like the concept of the way the world networks. So you go into a networking event, and the objective to going into a networking event like that is you make new connections, you walk up to people because you got something that they need to have from you, and you need to make money from it. Many of us can't bear that model. We grew up with it. That's what we think networking means. And more I find people who really don't like that way of networking. Yeah. The Relationology model for networking is going into a room like that with maybe 200 people, most of whom you've never met before, going in and saying, what can I bring to give to people who need what you have for me to give them? Please tell us. Show me the people. And that's an example of how our objective is to coach and help amazing people doing amazing things through amazing relationships and giving them the tools to be able to do things differently, often challenging worldview, flipping things around. It's very much biblically resourced or biblically, the foundation is biblical, but we are not, we operate more widely than that in the secular world as well. So our programs involve, here we have some connections coming up here, but we have those who are of faith, are not yet of faith, would be in all of our programs. And we find there's a kind of special magic in all of that to achieve those things, which is changing lives. And we're not changing their lives. Others' lives have been changed by one another and by, I think, the presence beyond, which is in the room, or on the online call, because it's basically all online.
So this is your connector role in action. You're bringing people together. You told me last week, you're bringing people together that aren't normally together. And you're talking about people of faith, people not of faith, people of business, people of the community. You're forming these groups, if you will, or these gatherings. Mm-hmm. And I get the picture that by bringing all that different, that diversity together, the divine connections begin to spark versus we always want to be with people like us. What they call the homogeneity principle. I like people like me. I don't like people, or I'm suspicious of people who aren't like me. But getting me into a place where I'm not around people like me, or not everybody like me, some amazing things start happening. You and I saw that in Bucharest last February. 100 people from 8 different countries, and not counting the Westerners, that from 8 different European countries. And just the things that happened, there was a real specialness to that. You probably sat in the corner. You didn't really sit in the corner, but you probably observed with a big smile on your face, watching and seeing and knowing what was happening. That must have been really joyful for you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, very much so.
So what are the kinds of things you use to bring people together as connectors? Is it just everything from a couple of guys having coffee to, what do you actually do?
Is this me as SP or the Relationology partners and me?
Really both.
Okay. So Relationology has a formality to it in as much that we have typically regular online meetings of a cohort, which is very open to different people. And one of the secrets there is content, but we have something called the hot seat, and each person in the cohort of one of the programs gets one moment on the hot seat. And that's when that worldview comes in. They present a particular professional challenge or opportunity. They present it. The group listen, they stop. The group then comments back with their thoughts on how to address the challenge or develop the opportunity. And then once all that's happened, the person who is in the hot seat is able to respond to what they learned. And for me, this is one of the things that I've loved the most. And even last week, I had a message from a friend of mine in Nairobi who'd been on one of these programs 2 years ago, who simply said, SP, that experience changed my life. And I'm now flying professionally. And I got the ideas of how to make that happen by being on the hot seat, by being in a group which was made up of Serbian, Romanian, Hungarian, she's from Kenya, and me, who's kind of a bit of a hybrid. But so having all those people together, she got some perspectives which she had never thought about before, and she applied them dutifully or diligently. And a year later, she's looking back. My objective was this, and now I'm living out that objective. So that's one way that we do it, which is the kind of the Relationology way. I think the other important thing is that I'm very, very blessed with the different things I'm involved with to meet amazing people all over the place wherever I go. And I'm always open to people and listening carefully to the promptings in my spirit, but who I need to talk to, who I need to connect to. And I'm always looking for those people. For example, if I go to a conference or an event, I'll take the list of participants and I'll seek the people, review the names. All right, these are the 3 people I need to go and find, and I need to go and talk to them. And then something will happen. And the other important thing is when something does happen, it may happen at that moment. So in the BAM conference, I think I had 3 mind-blowing connections, other than the regular stuff, which was meeting people like you and the other Romanian, but some young people who somehow connected with me and still in contact with them today. And it happened at that moment, and it was a wow. Oftentimes, it's having an introduction to a person, knowing them a little bit. Nothing will happen for 6 months, a year, even 2 years. But they're always somewhere in the back of my mind. And when a moment comes, I'll connect them. That's the bit that I think I really appreciate. I say, I can't actually help you right now with that challenge you're facing, but I promise I'll pray about it. I'll bear it in mind. And if something happens, I'll act. And I do. I go to people suddenly out of the blue, they get a contact from me. Hey, Mike, you really need to speak to this person in Australia or Kenya because there's a reason for that. And that's that's one of the ways that I do it. And if I have the privilege or the opportunity or the honor of preparing the guest list, then it's very important for me to mix up every aspect of, I guess, not my world, because then I'd be limiting it to my worldview, but those people I'm connected to. So I am involved in business. I am involved in government. In the fact, I represent the Irish state in this part of the world. I am involved with NGOs. And I am involved with churches and Christians and business people and so on. I like to have all of these kind of people at the events that I put together to see what sparks might fly, and just bring people together in a room and see what happens. And it's amazing.
You know, that's one of the blessings of the time in which we live, is the ability technologically to connect brothers and sisters and unbelievers as well. Resources in need. All over the world. It's never been like this before. I can't imagine it. I mean, I can't remember what it wasn't like this, although I'm old enough I should. But that's all right. So the other thing, and I know we'll need to start looking for a landing spot here, but you also mentioned your ministry of encouragement, and not just you, but your wife and your kids. I, for one, believe that one of the greatest needs in the world today is encouragement. For any number of reasons. But talk about how you and your wife and your kids, how did you get there? I mean, part of it, knowing you it's a spiritual gift. There's no question. But how did you get there as a family, and what does some of that look like?
I think one of the most special things about the gifts that God gives to us and calls us to is it should be really, really easy. It should be so easy we don't even know that we're doing it. We're just doing it. And I think it was having children, which my oldest son is 17. Having children is when I realized, oh, hang on a minute. This is what I'm called to too. This is what I do. But I didn't know I was doing it because I'm just getting on and doing it. And I love doing it. And it's just great. Why not? And then when I started to see the first son pops out, and from a very young age, was an encourager. Then the second son turns up, and he's an encourager. I'm thinking, this is getting a bit silly. My wife is a Hungarian from Romania, and she has a gift, which is of encouragement. She can talk to anybody. She gets to meet ambassadors on a regular basis because of my connections, or government people, or mayors, or whoever. She can talk brilliantly with them. But also, she's wonderful when she's out doing a soup kitchen, for example, which she did a couple of months ago, or going to a Roma village. She can talk to anybody. So I observed it in her. And what I realized was, and the icing on the cake is our third child is 4, and she has Down syndrome. And she's a bundle of encouragement. And it was, as I say, it was the seal at the end. Hang on a minute, this is her calling too. And that's what she does. So she goes to school with 350 kids in the school. And she was off because when she gets respiratory sickness, she doesn't have it for 2 or 3 days, she has it for 2 or 3 weeks. So she wasn't in school for 3 weeks. We went, took her back, and everybody, the teacher was so relieved. Oh, we're so glad she's back. We missed her a lot. And I'm thinking, it's her teachers. And I said, oh, you guys, yeah, I'm sure you missed her. No, not just us. 350 people missed your daughter. And she's only 4. Because she has a tradition. She goes into all the classes on the way in to say hi to everybody. When she sees someone in distress, she goes to deal with them straight away, puts their arms around them. So this is how I recognized it's our gift. And I think the truth is it's an easy thing. If you're walking in the gift that God has called you, it should be easy. So for me, for example, being out on the streets and evangelizing to strangers is very, very hard for me. I've done it and I'll do it, but it's not something that flows in me because it's not the gift. I don't have the gift of evangelism. And I think this is one of the really important things that I'd like to say is that whatever it is, the gifts that God has called us to, we must find out what it is, but it's going to be very, very easy to live it because it's natural. And that's his heart for us. He doesn't want us to get stressed out and anxious about what he would like us to do. He wants us to do what we do naturally and easily. But as I say, the important thing is, I didn't realize it until I started having children, that that's actually what I do. And then when the children started coming, oh, hang on a minute, where are they? So,
and your whole family, I love that. The whole family is together and individually encouraging people wherever they go. And as I said earlier, I do believe at all points in human history, but certainly today, people need encouragement, not just in the big things. Sometimes it's the little things. Just it's such a blessing. All right. So as we close, I'm going to ask you a technical question. How do people get in touch with you? Assuming that you want them to. How can they reach out to you and connect with you if God leads?
The easiest one is probably LinkedIn, because you just have to put in my name in LinkedIn and you'll find me. And then simply say, that would be the easiest way, I think.
That's right. Okay. Everybody has LinkedIn globally. Easy way to find you. I'll put it in the show notes. They'll be able to see just how you spell your name, but you'll be easy to find. So, okay. So last word, and obviously a word of encouragement. Whatever God's given you, what would you like to say to our listeners as we wrap up?
I think we're living in unprecedented times. We kind of touched on that in the last 45 minutes or so, Mike. So times are changing very, very fast. And I asked the Lord, what's this all about? It's quite scary if you think about some of the things that are happening around us. I don't need to explain what they are. We all know what the world is dealing with. And he said to me very simply, very clearly, it's all about being in unity. For us to be in unity with him, unity in our families, and unity with one another. And it's something that I would encourage for all. And it's something I've started saying in Romania. I tell them it's all about unity, keeping the faith and being in unity with one another. So don't make big deals of things that don't need to be made big deal of. but focus on keeping unity without compromising the truth, but to live in unity. And if we live in unity, he promises to be beside us and to keep us safe.
Unity with him, unity in our family, and unity with one another. Absolutely beautiful. SB, thanks so much for being with us. It's great to see you again. Great to hear your voice. Look forward to being in person soon, I hope. And we'll see. We'll see what God has in mind. But I've never forgotten our first encounter. I look forward to this conversation for a long time. So SP O'Mahony from Cluj, that's Cluj in Romania. A wonderful brother. Look him up on LinkedIn, S-P O' Mahoney. He'll pop up about the time you get to S-P. Not too many people on LinkedIn like that, but brother, thank you so much. God bless you, man.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen.